Okay, so Miss Butcher is sending out, I don't know, whatever you call it, a weekly newsletter, whatnot. Ooh. And we are making a request for students to have their cameras on, unless you make you make arrangements with the principal, the administration, as they refer to themselves. So hopefully I'll get to see more of your faces. It's definitely helpful during attendance time when you guys are coming in, if I can greet you and try to figure out who you are. Today I am in Miss Stabler's room. My room has no power and no outlet for a computer and other things it doesn't have. But Miss Stabler's room was all hooked up, so I decided I would use it. So we had our test on Monday, and you want to get used to whenever there's a test, I no longer am taking work from that chapter, okay? So I had announced on Thursday that I wasn't going to be taking work this week over chapters or weeks 1 and 2, which will also be helpful for me management-wise, trying to keep up with you guys' grades. If I'm not like, there's so many things to click, you know how that is. And then I get a lot of emails saying that somebody turned something in and it's not in yet. It's not automatic. Google does not link directly to Skyward. And I typically grade anatomy papers on Mondays and Thursdays. So today I have AP and Anat, so I'll grade your papers. And then Wednesday, I want to grade papers, but usually I end up doing a whole lot of emailing. And then the other 2 days I'm grading biology things. And I grade them early, like I want things in by 3:30. So then I'm going to grade them. And if yours comes in after 3:30 and I've already recorded that day's grade, it's just going to wait till I make my circle back around. Because I hit all these other classes along the way, and then I come back and I do another round to check and see. So you'd like to say 1 day, but really it's a couple days, because I'm not going to get to it till the next Monday or the next Thursday. So be patient. If the next day, if it doesn't show up, that Monday or Thursday after our Zoom, because I'm going to do the other classes before ours, then send me an email saying that it's out of there. Okay, so then I'll make sure to hit it. So today we're going to do a Nearpod. We start talking about the skeletal system today, so I wanted to come in so I could play with my bones. And you did a little bit of reading on that already, so you're starting to become familiar with that. In the link you'll find in the Google Classroom, you'll find the link for this Nearpod. And then we're going to start doing a lot of practice, because now we're into the memorizable information. So for your homework, you're going to turn in today by 3:30, the Kahoot. So we're going to do some practice with Kahoot. And then you also have a lab manual that you're going to read a section of, and it's mostly just pictures. And then like a front back side of page to answer questions on. So that takes a little bit longer. The sooner you get it in, the more likely it's going to make it into Skyward now. But you have until Wednesday to do that one. So Wednesday, 7:45 a.m. Okay, so that's what you see here, all the things we're doing. And ever-growing vocabulary list that went out last Thursday. So we do chunks of words today. This is the chunk we're doing. So if you wanted to open up your ever-growing vocabulary list or save it or print it, I usually highlight the chunks as I go. So you would know you want to be able to name these structures or describe these structures. And so it's a pretty big chunk for 1 day. Tomorrow, like when we come back, we'll hit all of these another day. That's a smaller chunk. Okay, so let's check out the Nearpod. So we're going on into the skeletal system. Today we're going to talk about bones of the skull, but first let's review what we've done so far. So last Thursday we talked about bone tissue and bone types. Already about half of us knew that bone tissue was called the osseous. So last week we talked about anything that has that OS beginning, osseous, ossification, osteoporosis, all of those ost prefixes are going to refer to bone. Okay, so now you have some pairs to look at. Do you have the pairs? Oh, awesome. Okay, thank you. So long bones, remember, longer than they are wide, irregular, no particular shape. Flat bones are like a sandwich, 2 compact bones with cancellous in between. And then our short bones are rather cuboidal in shape. Oh, interesting. So this is a color-coded picture. This is from our textbook, actually. So we can see the pinks, that's where our short bones are, and the green is our irregular. Today, we're going to talk a lot about flat bones, and then the long bones are the appendicular skeleton. But that's where some other resources will refer to the patella and the more cuboidal shaped ones as sigmoid, just to let you know. So the dense tissue, remember, has that very common circular shape. Both of these are dense tissues. Compact is another name for it. And then the spongy bone is much more porous. So the solid component, that's the bone, and the porous portion, porosity is the word I wanted, that's where you find the bone marrow. So it looks really speckly. So the pink here would be the bone itself, and then speckly business, that's your spongy bone. 2 words, spongy or cancellous, dense or compact. The osteon is the whole circle set. So here I have 1, 2, 3, 4 osteons. So you want to circle a big one. This is something I have kids do on the test. Usually like warm-ups end up being skills that I ask of you on test day. The lamella are each of these layers. So you could have labeled 1, 2, 3 different lamella there, 1, 2, 3, any of those, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, any of those whole circles, that layer would be a lamella. The reversion canal is in the middle. A lot of people thought that was the osteocyte. This is the blood vessel, and that's why it looks so thick. So the reversion canal. And then these things that look like spiders, that's the osteocyte. That's the cell itself, osteocyte. Okay. Going to do the same thing, only this time we're going to use spongy bone. So we're going to label the trabeculae, the matrix, a lacuna, and an osteocyte in this one. Kids usually find the cancellous tissue a little more tricky. So I have a different picture, and now I realize I really should have just given you the same one. But you can see the solid part, that's your trabeculae. All of this, that's your bone marrow. So probably blood cells in various stages of development there. Each of these little circles within the trabeculae, each of those circles are lacunas. So here's 3, 1, 2, 3 good lacunas, and inside of it sits the osteocyte. So it doesn't look like the osteocyte does in the other picture. It's not that spidery looking. So you would have circled a whole set of that and then pointed to the dot inside. So the lacuna is a pit and the cell sits inside of it. Okay. All right, so we're going to keep moving with our information. Today we're going to focus in on the axial skeleton. So there's 206 bones in the whole human adult skeleton. We're not going to learn all of them, but we'll learn many of them. 80 are in the axial skeleton that you see here. 126 are over here. So the next slide, I want you to state the obvious. What is the axial skeleton composed of? So we just looked at a picture comparing axial and appendicular. You have the same picture in the top corner, I think, of this slide. I'm not sure where the picture shows up on yours. So what is the axial skeleton composed of? Appendicular is on the left in this one, axial is on the right. That's the opposite of what I had. There was like this huge lag time. It went from 30 seconds to just 6 seconds. Good, good, good. So when we refer to the axial skeleton, we're referring to this portion here in green, which is the skull. And the skull is made up of the cranium and the face, the whole vertebral column, as well as the rib cage. They refer to it as the bony thorax. So 80 bones make up the axial skeleton. This week, we're going to spend on the axial skeleton. Next week, we'll hit the appendicular skeleton, the arms, the legs, and the two girdles that attach them. And there's 126 bones in those. I do ask numbers on this test. So I throw those numbers out and you'll hold on to them. So today we're talking about the skull of the human head. And there's 8 bones that make up the cranium, and you might think of the cranium kind of like your helmet. And then there's 14 bones that make up your face, okay? So we'll separate those out. We'll talk about the cranium first. I thought I had a, I guess it comes later. So anyways, here's the cranial bones. The 1 and the 2 refers to the fact that you have singular bones. You have only one frontal bone, only one sphenoid bone, but you have 2 parietal bones, 2 temporal bones, 1 occipital bone. So that's how many you have of each. So many of them are paired bones. You have a right and a left. In the face, you have your nasal bone, zygomatic bone, maxilla, mandible, and then you have some internal bones that we'll talk about as well. And again, you can see all of these are paired. You have a right and a left. So remember the bones, the skeletal system, one of the main jobs of the skeletal system is to protect the internal organs. So what is the cranium protecting? It's protecting your brain. What is the face protecting? It's protecting your sense organs of hearing, smell, sight, and taste. They also provide attachment for muscles. So any projections coming out, like a projection is a bony piece sticking out, basically. Any projection serves for attachment of muscles. So muscles of the head or muscles of the face. Our face, mostly our muscles are for facial expression and talking and chewing. So here's a mnemonic you can use. Pest of 6 helps you remember there's 6 different cranial bones. And the first letter is the first letter of one of those bones. So you have the parietal, the ethmoid, the sphenoid, the temporal, the occipital, and the frontal bones. So we're going to want to know where they are. We're going to label these on a quiz Friday. So you're going to start studying those right away. And then 2 of them are paired. So we have a right and a left parietal and a right and a left temporal. The rest of them are singular. So that's how we end up with 8, because you had to add 2 more of that. So the parietal bone is the biggest probably bones of your head, the top, and they make up part of the side. So if you can see this skeleton here, this portion is all the parietal bone. And he's got 2 sides with that. And it actually comes from the Latin term, or the, like prefix or root pariet, which means side. There are sutures. Sutures are immovable joints in between bones. So on this, you can see this line right here, kind of looks like stitching. That is a non-movable joint. That's a suture. So between the frontal bone and the parietal bones, you have this coronal suture. And between the 2 parietal bones, right down the middle of your head, you have the sagittal suture. And in the back, between the parietal and the occipital, you have this Y, upside down Y maybe shape. That's your lambdoid suture. And then you have squamous suture here, where the parietal bone and the temporal meet. And that is squamous as in scale-like. So that kind of describes its shape. So we'll work on those. So the frontal bone is the forehead. Remember that our landmarking terms, we used frontal to mean forehead. And for the humans, that frontal bone is a single piece. But in other animals, that frontal bone is paired. So like here's an example of that. So the frontal bone makes up the forehead as well as the eyebrow ridges and the top portion of the eye socket. The occipital bone is the back of your head. Remember, that's a landmarking term. So the base of the skull is the occipital bone. I can use this half part here. So the back portion here. Inside of it, you have this giant hole. So holes are called foramens. And this is the magnum foramen or foramen magnum, meaning the largest hole. This is where the spinal cord passes through. So the brainstem connects to the spinal cord and it passes through the foramen magnum to enter into the vertebral column. Another feature you see on this is the condyles, the occipital condyles right here, the occipital condyles. This allows like for the rocking motion of our head. So that connects with the vertebrae there. Then we have the temporal bones, which are not where you think of as your temple. The temporal bones are more like surrounding your ear. So the temporal bone is there. And then I use this guy. So the temporal bone is right here. And it has a few extensions. We have this zygomatic process that makes up like the skinny part of your cheek in the back. You have this mastoid process. If you feel behind your ear, you'll feel this knob. So muscles that move your neck attach to that mastoid process. You have a styloid process, which connects to components of your ear. And the auditory meatus, external auditory meatus. Meatus are canals. So this canal is your ear canal. And this is just talking about, here's that external auditory meatus. Here's that zygomatic process and the styloid process and the mastoid process. So those are all special features of the temporal bone. And I just went through those sutures with you. Frontal, coronal, they're interchangeable. Sagittal, straight back. Squamous around the side, and lambdoid around the back. The sphenoid bone is considered the cornerstone of the skull because all other bones connect to the sphenoid bone. So this bone sits inside of your skull. It begins here behind your eyebrow ridge and it goes all the way to this eyebrow ridge and it goes through the middle of your skull. So it's hard to look at that one. If you could imagine taking the top off of a skull and then looking down on it, this would be your sphenoid bone right here. This is in the front. So it's often described as looking like a butterfly or a bat. And then the ethmoid bone is like the internal edge of your upper nasal area and the back of your eyebrow. So if you could picture a bone running between my two fingers through the back side of my nose, that would be the ethmoid bone. Okay, so the bones, you'll notice they were either AL endings or all endings, AL or OID, sorry, oids. So like parietal, frontals, occipital, those are all external bones, the ALs. Oids, OID, those are internal bones. So the sphenoid and the ethmoid. Okay, so this is that sphenoid bone. I told you it is the cornerstone because all bones connect to it. And you can see how all of these bones would end up connecting to the sphenoid bone. When we're first born, this is all cartilage. Well, your skull is cartilage as you're developing, and then the sutures in between are still cartilage when you're born. So the babies have the fontanelles, the soft spots that you have to be really careful of. And it serves a couple purposes. We refer to molding because it can change its shape if it's soft in between the two. And the head would be too big to go through the birth canal. So this allows for the head to be like squished and the bones can kind of slide past one another in order to get through the canal. It also allows for expanding of the brain after you're born and your brain continues to grow. So it has to fill that space. Okay, that was a lot of information, 8 bones with a few special features. Are any questions? I'm looking for my chat box. Any questions jumping out at you right now before I go on?
Are we gonna be able to like see this like as the Nearpod without answering the questions to go back and study and stuff still be up?
Yeah, so right now it's listed as live. I'm gonna go back and put it as student paced.
Okay.
Yeah. So you'll be able to do that. Good question. Okay, so we'll get on to the face. So most of the face bones are paired, a right and a left. The mandible, which is the lower jawbone, the mandible is not paired. And the vomer, which is like the base of the nose, like the nasal septum, that portion is not paired, but all the rest of them are. So we'll go through those. The mandible, I'm going to use this one. He has got a better foreman. So the mandible is the lower jaw. It has the body, and then the uprights are called the ramus. So we have that, and then this special feature here, the little hole. Remember, foramens are holes. So it has this mental, because we learned mental was chin, right? The mental foramen. So nerves pass through there and enter the jaw. So you're familiar with that if you've ever had your jaw numbed for dental work, because they're searching for the nerve that comes through that hole. Okay, so that's the mandible. The maxilla, the upper jaw, you know maxilla is upper limit, right? So the maxilla is the upper jaw. There's actually 2, sorry, I'm showing myself, 2. You don't really see the suture here, but there would be a suture. I have some other skulls that I didn't find. So that's the maxilla. You can see the alveolar margin. So that's both on the top and the bottom, where the teeth connect to the jaw. You also have these paranasal sinuses. So if you've ever had like a sinus infection, you could really feel it in your maxilla. Some other sinuses that we have in the frontal bone, we have sinus. So you might have had like a sinus headache. You also have the ethmoid and the sphenoid sinuses here along the bridge of your nose. So those sinuses are air-filled cavities. They lighten the weight of our head, as well as they're lined with mucous membranes, so that humidifies, moistens the air that you breathe, warms it, and it takes out any of particles. And so that's where you can get sinus infections, because of that mucous membrane collecting things out of the air. The eye socket itself is made up of several bones. So if you go around it, you have your frontal bone making up the ridge. You have your sphenoid bone making up the lateral wall, the zygomatic bone, maxilla, lacrimal, and ethmoid bone. So all of those bones together make up the orbit. The orbit is the eye socket. So it's not just a hole in your skull, but it's actually many different bones coming together. So the zygomatic bone is your cheekbone. So what you maybe like, where you put your blush, or the guys might get punched, or like the football players always come and tell me like, hey, Miss Snooker got hit in the zygomatic, and they're proud of themselves. So I like that. I like when you use the words in your regular world. Also the lacrimal bone is the smallest bone in the face, and it's way to the inside corner of your eye. So if you think about where your tears come, that's going to be your lacrimal bone, just like a fingernail size, pinky fingernail size bone. So right here, you can see that very small, very thin bone. The pallentine bone is like the roof of your mouth. So you might know somebody who's had a cleft palate where the pallentine hasn't fused together. And then the nasal bone is the bridge of your nose. So if you've broken your bone, it's probably the nasal bone that you've broken. So up there. So the vomer means plow, and you're familiar with probably the nasal septum that divides the entire right and left of your nose. So the bottom portion here, just the bottom portion is the vomer. And then the nasal concha, you have 3 sets, superior, middle, and inferior, 3 sets of scroll-like bones. So they create circulation of the air to ensure that it comes in contact with the mucous membrane. So this guy has the best concha that I have. Can you see the scroll-like bones in there? So those are the nasal concha, and we all have that. And then the nasal cavity, you can see, is many, many different bones coming together. The cavity is just the openings. And we already talked about the mucous membranes that collect the debris, and then it goes down into your throat, the pharynx, and into your esophagus for digestion. The final bone is the hyoid bone, which is not actually a skull bone, but it's associated with the skull bone, so it's talked about at the same time. It's a little U-shaped bone at the base of your tongue. So your tongue connects to the hyoid, and it sits right above your voice box, your larynx. So it's right about there. And it's an attachment point for muscles of the neck, as well as an anchor for the tongue. Okay, so we would want to be able to label both a frontal view like this and a parietal view, or I'm sorry, lateral view, like looking at it from the side, or sagittal, however you want to think of it. So we're going to do some practices. I got a couple embedded practices in this, and then you have more practice that you can do on your own before Friday. So before I get into that, do you have any questions over the facial bones? Okay, so this should launch a Quizlet for you. So I will give you 2 minutes to flip through those. So that gave you some practice. Hopefully you identified ones that were pretty easy for you. Frontal should be easy, and then ones that you feel like would require a little bit more practice. So we're going to do one more practice, guided practice. So this is purpose games. There's a couple more of these that are linked in your Google Classroom for practice. You may have to unblock something. Last year I had to do some unblocking, but this year I haven't had any problems. But go ahead and give that a go. When you hit the arrow, it should launch a game where you're identifying, like, says alveolar margin, and then I want to go find the dot for that. So that one takes about 2 minutes, so I'll give you that. Hopefully that was enough time. If you need more time on either of those, or you just want to revisit them, I'm going to put a link in so that you guys can do this at student pace. Okay, so in the Google Classroom, we did the Nearpod, so you want to hit done on that. You're going to do the Kahoot today before 3:30, and then you're going to hit done on that. You're going to launch the Kahoot right from there. Then this is the review worksheet that I wanted to show you, because it's a lab manual. Most of it is just pictures, just kind of showing you, helping you learn, have in mind, you know, the words you need to learn. And there's just a little bit of reading that comes along here and there, but for the most part, it's pictures. We're not doing the vertebrae yet, so you can skip ahead. Once you hit that, skip through all the vertebrae. We'll come back to that. And then we get to the review sheet. I want you to do the first sheet, which is this one. And unfortunately, I haven't made a Google Doc of it, so maybe you could open it in Cami or Lumen PD and just insert text boxes for the letters, and then save that, and then attach your saved file, right? Because it doesn't automatically do that for you. And here's the second one. And the same thing, you can put your text boxes in, or copy paste the picture into Paint, and then just use Paint to add your letters, whichever one you think is easiest. So those are the 2 pages that you're going to put any answers on, just those 2, 141 and 142. Okay, And then the other thing we have in the Google world is just practice. So I put in a couple extra. So you already have the Kahoot, and we did a Quizlet and one of those practice games. Here's 2 more practice games and a video. Those are just for your own good. That's not something you have to turn in. It's there for you to practice. Take it or leave it. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share.